The wall does not always fall with a bang. Sometimes it cracks, quietly, then all at once. Iran is approaching one of those moments, not because slogans are louder, but because fear is weaker. For 3 weeks, people have stayed in the streets, not as a gesture, as a decision. This is not 2009. This is not silence from Washington. This is not a regime that still looks invincible. After the B-2 strike, after the 12-day war, after the illusion of strength collapsed, what you are watching is not chaos, it is exposure. A state that cannot provide food, water, fuel, or a currency. A patron in China that watched and did nothing. History moves when power loses its narrative. If this analysis matters to you, stay with me, because what happens next won't just reshape Iran, it will redraw lines far beyond it. And to understand why, we need to slow down briefly and look at what this moment is really about. This moment is not about a single protest, or a single leader, or a single decision in Washington. It is about legitimacy. Every political system survives on a basic promise: order, stability, a future that feels predictable. The Islamic Republic has broken that promise, not overnight, but systematically. An economy that no longer works, a currency that no longer holds, basic services that no longer arrive. For years, repression compensated for failure, force replaced performance, but repression only works when power looks permanent. The 12-day war changed that perception, not by toppling the regime, but by revealing its fragility. At the same time, the regime's strategic shield was exposed. China, the supposed guarantor, did not intervene, did not deter, did not rescue. So the protests are not reactive, they are rational. People are not testing the system, they are responding to its collapse. And once legitimacy erodes, history follows a pattern. To understand why Iran reached this point, we have to go backward into the choices and cycles that made this outcome inevitable. To understand this rupture, you have to return to the last time Iran stood at a crossroads. 2009, the Green Revolution, millions in the streets, an election that no one believed, a regime caught off balance, and then time the regime used to recover, time Washington gave it, after the Cairo speech, after the outstretched hand, after strategic silence. The calculation was simple: engagement over confrontation, stability over disruption. That silence mattered. It told the regime it could shoot protesters and still negotiate. It told the system that legitimacy was optional. The result was the JCPOA, hundreds of billions flowing to Tehran, a state enriched, a society forgotten. Over the next decade, the pattern hardened: economic mismanagement, ideological rigidity, external patronage replacing internal consent. And gradually, Iran became something brittle, strong on paper, weak in reality. By the time war arrived, this was not a revolutionary state. It was a hollow one, and hollow systems fail in predictable ways, which brings us to the first true rupture in this story. The rupture came faster than anyone expected, not with a revolution, with a revelation. The 12-day war did not destroy the regime. It exposed it. For decades, the Islamic Republic ruled through myth, myth of deterrence, myth of asymmetric power, myth of untouchability. Then the strikes came: Israel, the United States, precision, speed, and suddenly the defenses failed. The response was muted. The red lines evaporated. What collapsed was not infrastructure, it was credibility. Inside Iran, people were watching closely. They saw a state that could threaten the world, but could not protect itself. They saw leaders who promised resistance yet delivered vulnerability. This was not just a military moment, it was psychological. When fear changes sides, power follows. The protests that followed were not spontaneous, they were released released by the realization that the regime was weaker than advertised. If you're still listening, pay attention here, because this is where illusion gives way to mechanism, and once you see the mechanism, you can never unsee it. What keeps a weakened system alive is not strength, it is control. And in Iran, control has a name: the National Information Network, the so-called Halal Internet, designed with help from China, expanded after 2019, perfected for moments like this. When protests rise, the regime does not persuade, it disconnects. Phones go dark, messages stop moving, images disappear before they spread. This is not chaos, it is architecture, a digital wall built inside the country, separating Iranians from each other and from the world. The cost is enormous: a fragile economy bleeding by the hour, commerce frozen, trust collapsing. But for the regime, silence is survival. What makes this moment different is not the tool, it is the limit. Shutting down a country cannot fix a broken system. It only delays the reckoning, and every delay increases pressure, because once people taste connection, control becomes temporary. And that pressure is about to surface again, more violently, more urgently than before. The pressure didn't dissipate, it concentrated, because while the internet went dark, reality did not. Food shortages worsened, fuel lines grew longer, water systems failed. A shutdown can silence messages, it cannot deliver bread. This was the second crisis, quieter than airstrikes, more dangerous than bombs. The regime faced a dilemma with no solution: reopen the networks and let coordination return, or keep them closed and accelerate economic collapse. At the same time, the final illusion fell away. China did not intervene. No emergency aid, no security guarantee, no rescue package. For years, Beijing was sold as the alternative, a strategic partner, a counterweight to the West. But when the system cracked, China chose distance. Inside Iran, that message landed hard. The patron that extracted energy and leverage offered nothing in return. That realization mattered more than any speech, because regimes can survive sanctions, they can survive isolation, they cannot survive abandonment. And once abandonment becomes visible, loyalty erodes fast. What followed was inevitable. The crisis moved from the state to the people. And that is where the story becomes personal. This is the point where analysis meets life, where systems stop being abstract and consequences become human. Because if you are an Iranian citizen today, this is not about geopolitics. It is about survival. You wait for fuel that does not come. You ration food without knowing when relief arrives. You hold a phone that cannot connect to family, to help, to truth. You are told this is foreign sabotage, but you know better. You know who failed to provide water. You know who destroyed the currency. You know who chose control over dignity. And you also know something new. You are not alone anymore. The fear that kept you quiet is gone, not because danger disappeared, but because the future already did. This is why people stay in the streets, not for ideology, for agency. If you are watching this from the outside, do not mistake silence for surrender. Moments like this decide decades. If this matters to you, share it. Pay attention, because when people reach this point, history does not rewind. It accelerates, and that acceleration is no longer contained within Iran's borders. What happens inside Iran never stays inside Iran, because this country sits at the intersection of energy, ideology, and power. When Iran destabilizes, markets react, alliances shift, rivals calculate. For China, this moment is especially dangerous. Iran is not just a partner, it is a supplier, a leverage point, a quiet artery of discounted energy feeding Chinese growth. If the regime weakens or falls, that artery becomes uncertain. And it's not just oil. Iran has been a node in a broader axis linking Beijing, Moscow, and proxy networks across the Middle East. A shaken Tehran means stress across that entire chain. For the United States, this creates an opening, not through invasion, not through occupation, but through exposure. Exposure of Chinese promises that do not hold, exposure of systems that extract without protecting. Every protest that continues every day China remains passive undermines Beijing's credibility far beyond Iran. Other capitals are watching quietly, carefully. They are asking a simple question. When pressure comes, who actually shows up? Iran may be the spark, but the signal is global. And once that signal is sent, it cannot be recalled. Which brings us to the most difficult question of all: what happens next? There are only three paths forward. History rarely offers more. The first is the best-case scenario. The regime fractures internally, security forces hesitate, control mechanisms fail faster than they can be repaired, protests persist, not explosively, relentlessly, power erodes without a final showdown, a slow surrender of authority, a wall coming down piece by piece. The second path is managed survival. The regime adapts, repression intensifies, connectivity is partially restored under tighter control, China increases quiet support, not to save the people, to stabilize the asset. Iran remains intact, but permanently weakened, more brittle, more dependent. The third path is the worst one. Violence escalates, miscalculation spreads, external actors intervene indirectly. The state survives, but only as a shell. None of these paths are clean. None are cost-free. But here is the constant. Systems that lose legitimacy never return to normal. They only move forward or collapse. Iran has crossed that threshold. And when a society reaches this point, the future is no longer about control. It is about time. History does not announce its turning points. It leaves clues, cracked myths, empty promises, walls built to keep people in. Iran is not falling because of foreign words. It is falling because its story no longer works. For 46 years, the Islamic Republic blamed America for every failure, sanctions, sabotage, conspiracies. It never mattered what Washington did or didn't do. What changed was this: the veto is gone. The regime no longer decides how the world responds to its collapse, and it no longer controls how its people see it. That is why warnings matter. That is why clarity matters. When President Trump refused to stay silent, when he refused to pretend neutrality was wisdom, he removed the last illusion. Just as tear down this wall once sounded reckless, today it sounds inevitable. Iran's walls are still standing, but they are surrounded. If you want to understand what comes after this moment, follow this analysis. Share it, stay engaged. Because when walls fall, they don't just change one country, they reshape the world.